Hello and welcome to another Macking domain video series. This time around, I'll be putting together some basic video tutorials for a number of our popular products. And of course, I'll also be time stamping this video so that you can immediately jump to the portion of the guide or the tutorial that answers the immediate question that you may have. So hopefully that will help as well. But if not, I'll begin with the quick introduction to the specific product that we have today, which is the Kiloview N Series of encoders/decoders. As you can tell, this is a pretty simple but hardy box that is used in production fields primarily if you need to bring NDI into your environment or to bring NDI out of your environment. What I mean basically in layman's term is if you need to convert HDMI back into the NDI format, it can be done with this box. If you need to do the opposite, which is from NDI back out to HDMI or SDI depending on the model, it can be done. As a quick rundown of the different models of the products, we have the N3 and the N30. Both are SDI, it's just that one is 3G, one is 12G. The 3 is 3G and the 30 would be 12G. So one would be 4K capable, one would be just HD. And then of course here specifically is the N4 variant, which is HDMI. And there's another one that I don't have with me right now, is the N40, which is a 4K capable HDMI. So that's just the general overview. But if Kiloview releases any new model in the future within this N series, you should still be able to find this guide relevant, because I think a lot of the setup steps are more or less the same. The only difference would be just the actual form factor and the connectors, but everything else should be more or less the same. So without further ado, I'll move on to the next portion, which is the actual tutorial beginning. Alright, in this section we're going to cover just the general physical connectors of the device itself and other sort of just the physical properties of the device itself. We'll start with the power connectors. As you can see on this side, this is a standard USB-C connector. It comes with the box. The box includes a cable and a wall socket, so this would be one of the standard ways you will power up the unit. It's just simply plug into a wall socket. But of course, for users that have a network switch that has PoE, you can in fact plug it to a PoE capable network switch and have the whole unit powered on. The connectors, of course, right here in this model, the N3 has 3G SDI connectors, as you can see. I'll show you an N4 on the back so that you can actually see the physical labels. So it'll be the same across all the N series products. There'll be an in and an out labeled clearly so that you can plug in properly depending on your application. Something to take note is that loop out is possible with all the models. If you're encoding a video in, you can in fact have the video duplicate signal looped back out so that you can put it into something like a viewfinder. Of course, goes without saying, the final connector will be the network connector. This is a standard RJ45 network connector, so that this is what you will plug into your NDI network switch lah. Another quick mention would be this 3.5mm jack. Of course, you can use this as audio input. It also can potentially function as a comms system plug. So that is an update for the future from Kiloview. Right now it's still in the works, but basically if you have one of those earphones with a mic, you can in fact plug into the connector at the back here so that your cameraman can actually start using it as a comms device. Just as a general overview of the construction of the device itself, you should expect a fairly solid metallic build. This I think is an aluminium body, so pretty good for cooling. At the bottom, you can see a standard camera screw thread, so you can actually mount this on a typical tripod or even on a sort of hot shoe threaded converter, so you can mount it on top of the camera. In the front, as you can roughly see, there is an LED indicator. This is the tally indicator, so that any NDI systems that is able to output tally information, you can in fact also use this box as a tally lamp. So in this case, I'm using a system that can output tally information. That's why you can see that it's turning red, because I'm also using this encoder as the converter so that I can record this video. So yeah, that's it for now for the connectors. In this section, we're going to show you a few simple ways to quickly get access to your web user interface, WebUI for short. We have to figure out this step first because that would be the primary way we're going to do configurations and setting changes on your device. We'll start with a simple method to find your WebUI, which is using this software called the NDI Studio Monitor. The Studio Monitor would be part of a software pack called NDI Tools. I'll be including the link at the bottom of the description on how you can download the NDI Tools pack. But once you have this software, you can start pulling any NDI sources on the network onto your screen. In this case, we have an N3 sitting in the network, so we'll want to pull it here. We can either select that through the top left corner menu here, or right-clicking anywhere in the screen. And you can see I have an N3 device listed. Once I select this, you can see the device itself. Right now I have no camera connected, but as you can tell, I can still pull the device in. So once you pull an NDI source, you should be able to see a new icon at the bottom right corner here, the gear icon. By clicking on it, it will bring you to your browser, straight to the device IP address, so that you can actually see the WebUI straight away. The alternative method is to simply know the IP address of the device and putting it into your web browser straight away. In order to find out what your IP address is, a simple way to do that is a software like Advanced IP Scanner. You can use it to scan all the IP devices on the network. This software is also free. Just click IP and run the scan, and in a few moments it should list out all the devices on the network with the corresponding IP addresses that they have. Alright, as you can see, there are 3 devices on my network, and the second device is probably the Kiloview. As you can see, the name is not really listed in the metadata, so this method can be a bit troublesome if you have a lot of devices on your network. So it'll be a bit harder to identify. You may need to punch in the IP address one by one to test out which one is the actual correct one. But of course, if you can, probably the first method would be preferable because that would be an easier way to keep track of which devices are actually getting pulled. Now that we are on the web UI of the device, as you can see, we need to log in. If it's your first time logging in, it will be the default admin for password and username. So just quickly punch that in and you should be able to log in. It will either bring you to the main page, as you can see here, or if it's your very first time logging into the device, there is a chance that if you're on the later firmware, you may be greeted by an EULA license agreement or user agreement. Simply select I accept and you should be able to move on to the main page. Something to take note is that you are required to accept the terms before you can actually start using the device. So if you are having an issue where you're not getting a signal on the device, there may be a chance that that is your issue, and you just simply need to log into your web UI and accept the license agreement and your device should be ready to go. Now, by default, it should default to the encode page on your first login, and you can stay on this page for as long as you need to use this device as an encoder. But if you need to switch to a decoder, as you can see the tab above here, you can simply select decode and select OK, and you should start seeing the transition happen already. So this basically is all there is to it on whether you want to select it as a decode or encode. Now let's talk about the encoding page. So this page will be the primary page that you will be doing your configurations for anything related to your encoding. On the top would be some helpful meters or monitors so that you can keep an eye on the camera source itself and also the network. So this will be useful for any troubleshooting situations. So you can have a quick tally on whether you are getting the right format from your camera and whether your bitrate is healthy. So camera related troubleshoot for the configuration on the camera side, you can refer to these monitors to make sure you're getting the right signal out. Now the bitrate is useful for network related troubleshoots. So for example, HD 60p signal would typically be around 100 plus megabits, or in this case 140,000 plus kilobits per second. So that means I am within what I expect for the NDI signal flow. Now if the value is lower than expected, then you know it's something to do with the network. Either it could be a problem with the switch, or it could be very well a problem with the device's port. But yeah, useful tools up here for you to troubleshoot. Now let's move on to the basic settings. You can do simple things like renaming the device to something maybe a little bit more easy to understand as a human. So you can name it as N3, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, so that you can keep track of your devices. But of course, by default, this is what you get. This is probably the factory assigned device name. And of course, the channel name also can be changed, although for the Kiloview encoders, you only really get one channel, so I usually do not touch that. You can also pull down the video and audio settings. So primarily this page I would use to alternate between the audio settings. So as mentioned earlier, you can select the line in instead. That means there's a 3.5mm jack. If you have an audio source coming in from that way, instead you can select it from here, or you can leave it to the default SDI, which is just the embedded audio. So the number of channels I think corresponds to the audio setting as well. Leaving it on auto should be fine. Volume is a useful tool. If for any reason your source is a bit too soft, you can also use this device to just boost the signal a bit. Now this feature I do not use much, and I don't think it's widely used, so I won't really cover much. Now on the advanced settings, you can, on this page, set up for connections that require multicasting. So if you want to, this would be a more advanced feature. So for setups where certain devices need to get pulled by several different machines at the same time, multicast would be an option. So this would be the page where you come in to set up lah. But of course, as with multicasting features is concerned, even the switch also has to be configured. So if you are a bit uncertain about how to do a setup, perhaps this would not be a feature you'll be touching for the time being. Something to take note is also the Kiloview encoder actually does include software browser-based PTZ control. So any PTZ with the standard IP protocols like Misc over IP, there is a chance that you can use this web page to control the PTZ as well. So as you can see here, if you open, you can choose like a network PTZ and choose the protocol. This one you have to refer to your PTZ manufacturer's specification on how to set up for PTZ connection over IP. But if you match all those information to the corresponding values and hit apply, you should be able to start controlling. So once you hit apply and connect, you can press test, and this will bring you to the typical PTZ control options here. So like the controlling the pan and tilt and the zoom. Focus can also be controlled for some models, and you can even perhaps save some presets here. Okay, let's talk decoding. So as you know, the device can be used as a decoder so that it can bring NDI sources back into an analog format. So of course, we'll start with actually finding the NDI sources on the network, which can be found at the bottom here in the source list. So in my case, I have two different network sources. In this case, I would want to focus in on my vMix production output, for example. So if I want to start pushing my vMix out as the main decoding channel, I'll simply have to go to the right side under operations. You can see there's a decode button here. This is the icon. Once I click decode, as you can see, the top monitor gets occupied so that you know the signal has been pulled. So again, these monitors are useful. The values are useful for troubleshooting so that you know whether you're matching the correct frame rate if as required, and also the IP address of the source NDI device. The bitrate again would be useful for any network related troubleshoot so that you know whether you are hitting the mark in the expected bitrate or not. A quick mention would also be the decoding preset feature on the Kiloview. This tool is basically an easy way to just have 9 of your most widely used NDI sources ready to go on a click of a button. So it may not be immediately obvious on its usefulness because right now my source list is very limited, but imagine if I have a long source list, then the presets will be a useful asset to quickly recall my top 10 NDI sources that I want to decode. So how do we set up a preset? It can be as simple as going to your device of choice, Under operations, right side of the icon, as you can see here, is add to preset. Clicking on the plus button, you can select the preset slot that you want. In this case, I'll choose number 1. Once you hit OK, you can see that the preset slot is being occupied with the device name. So that once I have it there, on the click of a button, the device will immediately choose that source to decode. On the 10th slot also, if you notice, there is a blank solid color that you can choose to output in cases where you just want to have a screen black, for example, or any other color of your choice as required. You can choose from here with the hex value as needed. Now we're going to talk about some basic network settings that you might need to do depending on the situation for your device. As you can see on the top tab here, there is a tab for network. When you click on it, you'll be greeted with some of the familiar settings that you'll find in any typical network devices. We'll start with the Ethernet setup. By default, you'll be in DHCP. I would advise not to change this unless you know what you're doing. If you're going for a specific static IP setup, if you need to do that, simply select the drop down and you can set things manually, as you can see here. And once you do that, all these values can be changed according to your network needs. Something to take note is if you change the IP address of your device, be prepared to, once you hit apply, this page will probably not be connected anymore and you have to input the new IP address on your browser in order to get back to the settings page. So I'll just switch it back to DHCP. The local link failsafe is sort of an additional feature provided by Kiloview as a simple way to have a fallback IP. This is not the primary address of the device, and it won't be the primary address that will be used to recognize on the NDI workflow, but it is there for you to easily hard code an IP address to the device itself so that you can easily find it on a new network, for example, where you need to find the device on the browser. So for example, if I know I'm going to very often work in networks with the subnet 1, I can hard code an IP address like 169 so that whenever I bring this device to any new network that is subnet 1 and plug it in, I always know that 169 would be the device IP that I can click on so that I can reach the browser page. Take note though that the local link failsafe, if you have conflicting IP addresses in the same device, in the same network, you may have to disable this feature or choose a different IP address because it is known to cause some conflict in the past. So this is the HTTP and HTTPS settings. This would be more for configuring your port number. This one would be relevant to situations where you need to potentially do remote configurations. But if all these terms are not familiar to you, I would advise not touching this at all and just leave it in the defaults. But for those who know what I'm talking about, this is where you would find them. In this part, we're going to talk briefly about some of the typical system setup options that you have with the device. If you see on the top right corner here, on the drop down under system setups, you have a few options that may be useful whether you are troubleshooting the device or setting up the device. Let's start with manage users. So this page is the page where you would be accessing if you want to create multiple users so that you don't have to share login information across your team. They all can have their unique login information and still access this device. Of course, we have here is the default admin as mentioned earlier. So if you want to change the login credentials, this would be the page to do it. You can either add a new one or modify an existing one. Next, the reconnect feature is just simply a quick network refresh for the device. So if you're having some unstable network that you want to do a quick refresh, you can click this button and it will do so. Now a reboot would be a full power cycle of the device triggered via the UI, of course. This also can be done simply by unplugging the device and replugging it in. So depending on how you want to work, this might be a useful option. Now, reset factory setting, it corresponds to the actual physical reset button on the device as well. So either way, whether you trigger it with a pin on the front of the device or whether you trigger it from the UI, both would reset it to its factory default settings. So something to take note if you ever need to troubleshoot the device and reach a point where the device isn't really responsive, this might be a viable option. Finally, as you can see here, there's a firmware update. This would be where you would access if you need to update firmware. I will, in the next section, show you specifically on the details of how you will go about updating your firmware. Alright, in this part, we're going to just walk through briefly how a firmware update would look like. So, of course, first thing we want to check is on what current firmware we are on the device. So if you hover your mouse above this top right corner, you see this eye icon. You can see all the relevant information that you need to know. So this also would be potentially useful if you need to troubleshoot with Kiloview when they ask for what version the device is on. Now, of course, we'll have to start by actually downloading the firmware update. So in this case, we'll have to go to the support web page for Kiloview. The URL is right above here, as you can see, kiloview.com/en/support. Once you hit this page, you just need to find the right model. Our model is under the NDI series, and there we go, N30. When we click into this page, there should be a section for downloading. So on the left here, as you can see, there is a download center. Of course, if you need to read through any of the user manuals, it's also available here. By going to download center and clicking on the page, you'll be greeted with this landing page for the various downloads associated with this model. I'll go straight to firmware and hit download. Of course, I already have the file right here. Now let's go back to the WebUI under system setup and firmware update. You should get to this page where you can select the file. In this case, I'll select this .bin file, hit open, and once I hit upgrade, it should run the upgrade as per normal. As a quick note, we have had experiences in the past where trying to run this operation from Mac OS seems to be unsuccessful. So in this case, if you are struggling with upgrading your device from a Mac, you might want to try, if possible, to do this on a Windows device instead. Alright, that should be the conclusion of an overview of the basic setups for the Kiloview. If there are any other questions that you would like to ask, simply leave a comment at the end of this video or shoot us an email. Our contact information also will be available on the video description below. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and hope to see you again in future videos.